Hello, it's Dr. Courtney Alston of the Courting Happiness podcast. Have you checked out our happiness library? It's a carefully curated library with books that I highly recommend that are a must for your happiness library. Go to drcourtneyalston.com/happiness library. That's drkortneyalston.com/happiness library. The authors you will hear on the podcast can also be found in our happiness library. You can also purchase their books on our site. On top of that, your purchase also helps this podcast and the mission of courting happiness. Let's spread happiness and the word. Check out books on the Courting Happiness library. It will not only change your life, but it can also help you with your next chapter too. Let's get back to the podcast. Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Courtney Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 59. I'm Dr. Courtney Alston. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so happy that you're here. So, I have a couple of quick questions for you. First one, have you thought about having more fun at work? Have you thought about it? Here's another. What if you can't even imagine both fun and work in the same sentence? Well, if your hand is up and you're saying yes, we have the perfect scholar and author that will help you find joy on your job. Dr. Kathryn Owler's academic research will teach you practical strategies that will unleash happiness at work. Dr. Kathryn is the director of the Happiness at Work Coach. Her mission is to provide easy to follow, empirically proven steps that will help those who are bored, frustrated, and also unhappy at work. Now, I will say this, as a happiness scholar myself, I love the fact that Dr. Kathryn shares her personal journey as well as academic research. She talks about how her dream job turned into a nightmare. So does that sound like you? If you're shouting yes, well, this episode will help you design a happier path. So let's dive in. Dr. Kathryn Owler, I am so happy that you're here. I think everyone could probably hear that by the sound of my voice and the fact that I've been really excited about having this conversation with you. I truly admire you and your work and your message as it relates to really helping us in terms of having happiness at work, understanding the value of really fun and enjoyment, and also giving us, evidence-based practical tips that will really serve us across the board. And one of the things that I love is the fact that you also help in terms of helping us really understand how to channel despair. And I want to talk about that, especially when it relates to maybe work or any element of someone's life, right? And then we'll talk about the levels as relates to your dream job and the dream jobs of others in a moment. But how can one start to channel despair?
Well, first off, thank you for having me, Dr. Courtney. It's wonderful to be here with you and having this conversation. Yeah, so despair. So we can, I mean, obviously, as an emotion, it's a very difficult one, and it emerges often when we, out of something, perhaps expectations that we had and that have not been fulfilled in some way, in my experience. And there's been several times in my life that I've experienced that. And I think one of the things that I've learned about emotions is, and those challenging, difficult emotions, obviously, they're not the sort of emotions we really wish on ourselves. And we think, yay, I'm going to be experiencing a bit of despair here. That's great. But I think if we are able to just pause and actually acknowledge those emotions, they can be very, emotions are there for a reason. And if we can see what they're trying to tell us, and that's something I guess I've really learned, to be able to stop and think about, well, what's going on here? Why am I feeling this way? There's a reason for that, and it's not all bad. It's there's, and from that point, I think we can start to be a bit creative about how we go forward. So that would be my short answer to that question.
I love that in terms of the fact that, because when we think about despair, right, in terms of the whole negative dynamics, in terms of emotions, I love that you're talking about as it relates to like taking a pause and learning from it. What can we learn as relates from in terms of, ourselves as it relates to when we're going through some of those negative emotions as relates to despair?
Mm. Yeah. So I think we can, as I said, there's something that perhaps is a something we expected, some sort of disappointment, I think, and we're wanting something else. We're looking to the future, I think, too, with despair, because it's sort of it's an emotion that's around, well, what now? What's life about right now? And so we're looking to the future, and I think that I think for me is to start to see just those little moments in the present, where we can start to see kind of the magic in our lives. Or I remember when I was in one of my more I've sort of been two times in my life where dream jobs turned a little bit, not so good, and I've had these moments. And it was also at a time when I I wanted to be a mother and was not able to, and so I was in my job, and I was just feeling, yeah, those that sort of despair in my life at that time. What now? What's going to happen? What's the future? And it's a really difficult place to be in. And I was giving a seminar actually for students, and these were PhD students, and I was just talking about just the experience of writing a PhD and supporting and encouraging them. And you sort of wonder at those times, does this mean anything to them? And just having a student come up to me and just affirm and just say how that really helped me. It really helped me. I was talking about the spiritual nature of it as well, that I can connect to that. That's encouraged me. I feel like I can take, this is a whole of person journey for me. And I just went home and I just thought, okay, that little moment just gave me a flicker that, yes, what I'm doing now counts. And so I think once we acknowledge our despair and we start to think it through, and we start to kind of tap into those little moments, that they're the beginning, I think, of then being able to move forward.
I love that in terms of the beginning of being able to move forward. And it's interesting, there was so much great information that I was pulling from everything that you shared, Dr. Kathryn, because from, a person who I just completed my PhD in 2016, and I often talk about my dissertation chair, Dr. Julie Dodd, very often, and really how supportive she was throughout that process and how meaningful it was to me, especially for the fact that I was dealing with a mother who was dying. My mother died a month after I, actually a month, actually barely a month after I graduated from the PhD program. I graduated August 5th. My mother died August 31st. And so, while we're in,
Tough.
yeah, very tough, right? And talking
Mm,
about
mm,
despair. But what was so meaningful was the fact that I was at my graduation. My parents couldn't be there, understandably so, because of my mother's health. My dad never left my mother's side. They've been together nearly 50 years before she died. At the graduation, Dr. Dodd looks at me and says, I know your parents can't be here, but I'm here. And it was just so meaningful to me. How valuable is meaning throughout the journey of going through despair and trying to channel it?
Really good question. And I think for me, and despair in some sense is all about meaning in a way. I think when we feel despair, there is a sense of a lack of meaning, you know. And for me, I've always been someone who's been seeking meaning in my life, and I think that's why I did the study I did. I was always being a good girl at school and studying hard, and then I went on and did my degrees, and I did 3 degrees in a row. I studied all my 20s. And the reason was, yes, I did enjoy study, but I think what I was searching for was what was going to happen afterwards, the sense that, from my teachers and from my professors, I was doing something good, and studying and working hard. But it was the beyond that I was looking for. What was going to happen beyond? And I had some idea something amazing was going to happen if I did all these things and I studied. And actually, what I discovered was when I finished and I stepped out, it wasn't quite what I imagined. And one of the reasons why was that I hadn't thought very far about what I was going to do when I actually finished study. But I stepped out into a space of oh my gosh, this isn't quite, it's still life, it's not the nirvana I was hoping for. And I've lost track a little bit of the question, actually.
No, you have not. This is really powerful information because I love so much that you're sharing really so genuinely, really just pure in terms of your authenticity in terms of this is sharing really the dynamics as it relates to your journey. And I love that you're talking about the fact of seeking meaning because, I think that's one of the things that you and I feel like we have so much in common. That's probably one of the reasons why I was so excited when Dr. Kathryn emailed me and then so super excited as it relates to this conversation because meaning helps us really understand levels of purpose, right? And so what I love of what you're sharing is understanding levels of self and levels of purpose along the way because that has also fueled all the work that you're doing now in terms of your levels of passion for helping people really find happiness at work. So before we start going into what that can look like for an individual, I want you to talk more about your journey in regards to um, going through what we think is our dream job and then realizing not so much, right? Realizing it's not what I thought, or it's not, or maybe not what I feel. Share with us a little bit of that journey in regards to that revelation.
Sure, sure. So I guess that there's probably been two parts of my life that's experience I've had, and it relates to just what I mentioned when I'd finished my PhD, and I was stepping out, and it was like, I thought my dream job was going to eventuate. I didn't know quite what it was going to meant to be, but I thought it was all going to be great. And then, of course, you still got to start again. People, I had opportunities, but I was like, well, what's this all about? And so I think at that point I had pretty rock bottom, thinking, oh gosh, what have I done with my 20s? I could have been having a lot more fun, maybe, without all that study. So that led me on. I was in Australia at that point studying, and I returned to New Zealand, where I'm from, and I did find a job, and it was in a charity, and it was training people to support volunteers. And so, but I was looking around me at people I was working with, not only in that role, but others I knew, and thinking, yeah, but people sort of, they still seem pretty stressed at work, and that they I was starting to feel like people were putting up with a lot of unhappiness at work, almost like a badge of honor. So that was part of my journey to start to really think about happiness at work, my own sort of disappointments, and started to research in the area of how do you have fun at work. But that was mostly how employers might help support their staff. But jumping forward around 6 years ago, I did have a business at that point with my husband. Well, we still have it, actually, helping support employers. I stepped away from that, and I got a dream job, and it was actually in a university supporting students with their writing and graduate students. So it was really something that resonated with my PhD. So I was really, really excited, loved the job, wonderful team, felt so satisfied. It was quite challenging, you know. I was like the most wonderful job. You worried that someone's going to come and, you know, pinch me, and I'd wake up and it was a dream sort of thing. So I loved it for about a year. After a year, of course, you know, I felt like, oh, maybe I'd mastered the job. And there was just moments at which I felt a little bit bored, but I kept going because I did love it and I had loved the team. But then over the next few years, there were a couple of restructures. And that really was very difficult for me. I'd never been through anything like that before. And I went basically from loving my job to 3 years later being miserable. And that was the challenge that I had at that point. And that's when I went through another period of real despair, really. What next? And ultimately, I left that job because I really just didn't have the skills. I don't think I was equipped to know how to turn it around. And this has ultimately led me to research that I've done recently and the coaching that I do. So, I don't know, do you want me to talk about that, or?
Yeah, actually, I would love for you to talk about some of the coaching that you do, because I am thinking about some of the listeners who are hearing our conversation right now, and someone that may be saying, oh gosh, I am miserable in my job. I don't know what to do next. You know, how would you coach them through that, Dr. Kathryn, in terms of having them kind of spend some time kind of reevaluating and then giving them some actionable items to really kind of step forward and possibly maybe a next chapter?
Sure. Yes. And so, um, as I said, for me, when I was in that space, what I felt, it was this, it's not a very technical word, but it felt stuck. It's kind of a stuckness, I think we feel, because we have we just don't know where to move. It's very hard to see outside of our current reality. And so I think I like what you said about pausing and starting to examine. I think that really is the first step, to pause and start to examine. Prior to leaving this dream job, I started a piece of research with and finished it subsequent with people who claim to always have had fun in every job they've ever had. And they were people that ranged from their 20s through to their 60s. So there's a lot of work experience there. And I was fascinated to find out what their secrets were, both for myself and also to share with others. And I think one of the things that was very interesting about these people is that when I initially asked them, what do you do? How do you do it? How do you mostly have fun at work? At first, they weren't able to say. They knew that they did. They knew it was a priority for them. They knew we were a little bit different from other people in that regard, but they couldn't quite say. But when I really asked more questions and looked at the transcripts after the research, what I found is they did do things. Certainly they had strategies, and I can share a few of those strategies, but what was interesting is that I think it had become habitual. Their responses had, become habitual. So when there were challenges, until there were challenges, they sort of had these certain actions that they took, and it was more habitual. And so for them, they couldn't tease it out so much. But when I teased it out, I could sort of see some of the things they did. And so I think what I'm saying is that for people like myself who are not such experts at always having fun at work, but want to know how, pausing is a great step first, because I might take habitual actions that might take me in another direction. But if I can pause and examine my situation, then I might be able to do something different. And I can talk about some of the clues that I got from the research about that, if you like.
Yeah,
About what to do.
let's talk about some of those clues and strategies as it relates to what the participants shared, because I am really curious in regards to what they what they found that are really what they do that can help them in terms of kind of sparking that joy at work.
Yeah, sure. So I was just very fascinated too. So in some ways, it was quite simple. Uh, Things that we all know about. But the thing I think is kind of the magic, the key was that they did something. And I think that in my own experience, and with other people, I say when we're unhappy at work, we get stuck, and we don't we lose that sense of maybe hope or move where we might move. So these people, when they something wasn't right, not quite right, it might just be they're having not such a great day at work, um, or it might be something a bit more complex which they needed to really address in terms of their workload or something. But so they're having a bad day, so they might just pause, stop, and think, okay, I'm feeling a bit fed up here, I'm going to go for a walk around the block, or um, it might be, I've got something really big coming up that's really challenging. How I normally cope with this is just to be very, very prepared. I'm just going to prepare. And that way, it's much more likely that it's going to go well and I will enjoy it. Or, yes, I'm feeling as if I'm being asked to do role tasks outside my remit, and I need to address this. I need to address this with my colleagues. I need to address this with management in a way that's positive. So it was a range of things, and it could be, I found that it's great in the morning before I go to work to spend some time in prayer or meditation or whatever works for me. But it was doing these things. So when things weren't going so well, they didn't just do the same old thing. Same old leads to the same sort of outcome. They stopped and did something different. So in that sense, it was quite simple.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that because, you know, it's it does have a level of simplicity, and then it also has this really great proactive approach opposed to being reactive, right? In terms of, oh, I'm miserable, or I'm unhappy, or I'm angry, or I'm, but and then kind of sitting there in terms of that. What I love so much is that because it doesn't mean that they're absent in terms of any of these other negative emotions, right? In terms of having to feel that. But
Mm.
what I love is that they took inventory, and it sounds that they're like, okay, I'm gonna go for a walk, and or I'm going to reevaluate. And those are very powerful, because I think what happens, and I will say this, that I've even found myself throughout my career, as a former television reporter, and I loved all levels of my work as a television reporter. I live a life of journalism, including the fact that I'm engaged to an incredible journalist. But it's interesting when I think about my work, then I would really rarely take a break. I would be in the station vehicle getting ready for either my story or the next live shot, and I would maybe scarf down food very fast, right? And this was a job I was having a blast in.
Mm.
So imagine those habits when maybe you're not having a good time, or maybe you're not having fun, right? But thinking about what you need in terms of, okay, I'm going to go for that walk. I also feel like they taught us, and would love to hear your assessment on this. I feel like they gave us permission to be human and giving us a permission slip as it relates to, just think about how to replenish you.
Yeah, that's right. And it did for me too. One of the things that I found from the research they found that all had in common was for them enjoying their work was a priority. And perhaps aside from family, maybe it was the number one thing. You know, um, and so there was a sense of hope. And but yes, you're right. They were human too. So they weren't some sort of super. I mean, they sound like superhuman people, but because don't we all want that to have fun and all the time at work?
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, yes, they did have challenges. Yes, they did have bad days. Yes, they did have tough times. One of them actually in the sample was a journalist, and often would have to cover really quite sad stories. What did he do with that sort of thing? So, but they sort of, there was a sense of inherently being able to sort of acknowledge what was going on and take a step that was helpful for them. And I think for myself, that's been really, really useful because I think you're right. We do tend, we want to work hard. We want to be good workers, and when we're having a good time, we just tend to keep going. And then even when we're not having such a good time, we just tend to keep going as well. And I did that when I was miserable in that job. Because I wanted to be a positive person too, and can see I like wearing bright colored clothes, and so I would put bright colored clothes on and I would be smiling, and no one probably knew how miserable I was, because it sort of helped me, it sort of picked me up, but it also masked what was going on. And I think, look, that's something I've learned, and we've talked about already today, this idea of being able to stop and acknowledge our emotions.
Absolutely.
And
I'm
yeah.
curious about this because Dr. Kathryn has an incredible company in terms of happiness at work and happiness at work coach. And I love that her mission and message is really helping us individually, but then also helping as relates to an organizational standpoint. What can companies really understand and learn as relates to your research?
Yes, so my research was interesting because what I was finding on the one hand was that it was the individuals who I in my sample were people who really took responsibility. They actually saw themselves as responsible for their own happiness, which was kind of interesting. And I think a lot of us, I mean, and me included, often have a sense that it's other people's fault, or I don't know, it's the weather, or it's I'm got too much to do, or whatever it might be. But they took their own responsibility, which was very, very interesting. Um, and that's and also often we do attribute responsibility to our managers or the organization, and the people in my research did also believe that was very important. And most of them actually were working in fairly supportive organizations if they weren't self-employed. So those things were important. It was really important. They saw as really important to be able for their managers to have an open door policy so that they could go and discuss, issues. Um, so that was something that came through, that sort of open dialogue, being able to dialogue openly. So I guess from an organizational point of view, that's really, really important to be able to do that, to be able to be supported if they were going through tough times. So I mean, this journalist, I think camera person actually, having to cover some really tough stuff, and at one point, needing the support, needing having that recognized, and needing some professional support through that, and that sort of thing. So that kind of support from the company to acknowledge those difficulties, those emotions. And also perhaps that while these experts in my research had these tools to be able to pause and make decisions about how they might manage challenges, we don't all have that. And I think something that's come out of my research, and something that I do with individuals who I coach, is really about equipping with tools, practical strategies and tools that individuals can use at those moments. And so organizations can also play a role in supporting that kind of training and coaching.
Absolutely. I love that because it really allows for a more proactive dynamic within the workplace. It also, one of the things I love is the research behind compassion at work and the value of compassion at work and how it can help in terms of fueling innovation. And so there's great, research as it relates to the performance. But then I also love the fact that it's dealing with really understanding and valuing your team and having this empathetic dynamic in terms of leadership. How important is empathy throughout the process? It can be empathy organizationally, and then also empathy as it relates to thinking about this across the board. How important is
Mm.
empathy in terms of really understanding the dynamics of kind of tapping into happiness at work?
Yeah, really interesting question. And I think first off, in terms of empathy, in terms of ourselves, and what we've been talking about, that these, when we get into these spaces, being the kinds of people we are, being people who like to work hard, high achievers or whatever, we we kind of keep going, we kind of push on, and often we can think, we're doing it for the best intentions because of all those reasons, and we want to be positive people and so forth. Um, and we perhaps ultimately, maybe don't extend the empathy to ourselves in those situations. We are human, and it's likely that if we're feeling miserable now and we keep doing the same things, probably it's going to not improve. It's going to get the same old, same old. So being able to stop, take a break. We talked about taking breaks, whether that be just taking a break in the moment, going for a walk, taking a break, a weekend to think things through, a holiday. Holidays are wonderful, or coaching. Taking that, being empathetic with ourselves. We are having these difficult emotions. Um, but and yes, it might sort of improve itself, but giving ourselves the time and space to stop and think and work these things through is going to be really useful for us. So yeah, empathy in that way. And I guess the coaching that I do, I just see it as an opportunity for people to pause and have empathy for themselves, and through that process, have someone walk through that with that journey with them. So having empathy there. So from an individual point of view, empathy, yeah, and organizational empathy. Um, I mean, it's just, if you feel supported, um, it's, yeah.
Yeah, it's life changing, right? If
Yes, yes.
feeling that level of support within leadership, it is extremely life changing. I recently talked about this actually during a presentation I had yesterday, and I talked about how at a conference where I was presenting, I really valued hearing journalists in terms of leaders, journalistic leaders, meaning news leaders within newsrooms, talking about the importance of empathetic leadership. And so, what I love so much of what you're sharing, Dr. Kathryn, is the value of seeing that, but then also the value of being proactive with oneself, and even having a coach and having the support of a coach. I often talk about, because in positive psychology, we talk about I love that we talk about positive relationships. It's just not relationships, but qualifying them in positive relationships. I often
Mm.
talk about the value of creating your own self-care squad. And what I love so much about what you're sharing is the value of having a coach, and the coaching work that you do can really serve as a person's support system that I think sometimes we often don't think about enough as it relates to work, but it can be so powerful in terms of having that person that is there in your corner, that is kind of serving as this great resource for you.
Yes, yes, that's right. And we can think, uh, because we we often just kind of keep going and tough it out. Sometimes we think we don't, maybe deserve that kind of, taking that step and um, finding someone we can walk through with. That said, when I was in that job, that I was the last job, I was looking around for somebody, something. I had got to that point. I thought I need that, but I couldn't quite find it. So I think it's about finding the right person for yourself, and that's why partly why I'm doing the coaching, because I felt like what I wanted at that time was something really practical, but someone to walk through with me. And yeah, so I think that's what I love to be able to do, to provide that to provide that support. I think you're so right, and it's having good friends you can yak with as well, and then ultimately, obviously, as we talked about, the empathetic management, obviously, is great to start. But you talked about positive communication, and I think that's one of the aspects that I work through with people. Part of it is we look at boundaries, a range of boundaries, and also and how we can identify our needs, but yes, how might we then communicate those? Because I think we as humans, we can be quite fearful of having those conversations. We don't want to make things worse, and there's always a risk. We feel there's a risk involved, but being able to have those positive communication, positive relationships, and being able to express our needs in a way that is respectful, that is so powerful. And I think that can be a key to a lot of what can go on when we're unhappy, because if we're not we don't feel we have the ability to be able to share that with people at work, the appropriate people, it can mean, which is what I did, I left. And I think, looking back, if I'd had those tools and skills, it could have been quite a different outcome.
I love that you share that in terms of, because I see that in terms of a management standpoint, in terms of thinking about how to retain your talent, how to retain, the people that are making up your team. But then also, I love what you shared in regards to the fact of being able to have positive communication, to be able to have these really courageous conversations, because there's so much different and heightened levels of vulnerability and sharing. Maybe levels of your life, maybe it might be diminishing health, maybe it might be a change in the home, maybe it might be taking on something as relates to your family in terms of maybe serving as a caregiver or caretaker, so forth and so on, right?
Mm,
So I love that you're talking about positive communication, and I also love that you're sharing it as it relates to boundaries. How
mm.
impactful are boundaries in regards to how to kind of craft this conversation, in terms of, letting your employer know that, there's so many different things that are going on, within the constructs of your personal life, and then trying to be able to balance that at work. What do those boundaries look like, and maybe give us an example of how to go about kind of crafting it when we're trying to communicate in a positive way.
Sure. Yeah, so I think boundaries are really important. And I think one of the things is, when things are going well, we don't necessarily recognize, well, boundaries don't necessarily come up because things are going fine, but it's when our boundaries are crossed. And there's different kinds of boundaries. There might be, one of them in work often is obviously time, and you know either workload or work life sort of boundaries. But there are other boundaries that can happen in work. There can be emotional boundaries where, I had a situation where a manager was sharing with me a lot about some of the challenges in our team, and that was difficult because I felt like I was being, asked to sort of, I wanted to support them, but I also felt like it was compromising my integrity by being asked to talk about my teammates behind their back, really. That wasn't his intention. It was, he needed that support. But there are a range of different boundaries. And so I think we probably don't know, really recognize our boundaries often until they're crossed. And And then it's about being able to be compassionate enough with ourselves to recognize that it's okay to not be okay. And I think we can recognize our boundaries if something's bugging us and it doesn't kind of go away, and we're thinking about that person and we're thinking, oh, that's, I feel uncomfortable, or I feel angry, or I feel hurt, and it doesn't kind of go away. And so at that point we realize, okay, we might need to do something here with our boundaries. So to be able to say to ourselves, okay, this isn't okay for me. I don't necessarily want this. But what do I want? And what would that look like, and why? And I think sometimes we, in a work situation, say with a workload, a situation, we might see all our other colleagues working really, really hard as well. And we think, well, I can't say anything because they're working hard. But actually, it's about us, it's about me. And different people have different capacities. And it might be that once you think it through, it's not going to impact them. But yeah, where am I going with this? So
I love where you're going with it. I love it. I love it because it really is about it. It's so much in terms of empowering yourself and having this dialogue that can be really frightening to have, but it
Mm.
can be also transformative as relates to your work life as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that yeah, being able to have those conversations, and sometimes it's not a conversation, it's some other decision. I mean, it might be, there was, I when I was going through that restructure, there was, a lot of people were feeling, having, it was difficult, and so went to the tea room, and morning tea, and there was a lot of conversations going on. It's very easy to get pulled into conversations and complaints and moaning and, criticism of management and so forth, and didn't help me, really didn't help others. I think it's, the emotions can be contagious, and I also felt again like, I want to be that sort of person, so in that context I just made a pre-decision around what I would and wouldn't discuss in that context. So but it comes, it comes back, a lot of it's around values. And when I start coaching with people, we talk about values, and we talk about what other challenges people are having and why they're feeling difficult for that person. And often it comes down to their own priorities, their own values. And so that, a lot of it's about identifying those. And if they're being compromised, well, you don't want to compromise your values. It doesn't mean you have to be, really rigid either, but you give yourself an opportunity to just explore and see, what else might be done.
I love that in terms of giving yourself the opportunity to explore. I think that is so important and to really say and share, because I think sometimes as human beings, especially when you are, you value, being a hard worker or a high achiever or D all the above in terms of that dynamic, right? I think sometimes we often just want things to just fit or work. And sometimes I think what I love so much about what you just shared, it gives us permission to really kind of take this as an adventure in terms of just kind of understanding levels and dynamics as it relates to ourselves and also as it relates to an organization. It's interesting. I often tell friends this who are going through or going to, I should say, a job interview, and they're talking about, all the things that they're going to share within the job interview, or they come back to me and they say, hey, yeah, let me tell you how, the job interview went. And then they might share things that they noticed or recognized. And I said, that's great, because remember, just like they're interviewing you, you are also interviewing them to see if it's possibly a good fit. And what I love so much of what you're sharing, Dr. Kathryn, is that you literally are giving us this permission to be exploring the possibilities and not having to fit the square peg in the round hole, right? In terms of, I'm thinking about blocks as a kid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah, because I
Yeah,
think we do that, right?
I think so. And I think even, even if we have the best job in the world for us, the best fit, the best match, there'll be ups and downs, there will be changes. And how I like to see this process is a kind of tweaking. So you're constantly tweaking, really, this your experience And this is, I think, what the people in the research that I spoke about, these people who are experts in enjoying and having fun at work, they were constantly tweaking, and it might not have been such a conscious process for them in some ways, but for us, we can learn from them. And okay, things might be going along swimmingly, and then there's a challenge that comes up. It will, and I think it will come up even in the best circumstances, and we can stop, we can explore, and we can tweak, we can just shift, and we can change a little bit, little tack about how we might proceed. And I'm always doing that. um, yeah, I think it is a journey, as you say. It's a journey.
I love that in terms of being able to kind of tweak and kind of craft your work,
Yes.
right? In terms of what that looks like. I love that. I also love this. Dr. Kathryn, her book, Fun at Work, she has a chapter that talks about, she mentions rock bottom and climbing out. And it spoke to me on so many different levels, to the point where in my office, and in the studio where I'm talking to Dr. Kathryn now, I have actually a saying by actually I'm about to just promote J.K. Rowling to doctor. Did you see that? To J.K. Rowling, who she's magical in so many different levels, right? With her work in terms of Harry Potter and just being this incredible writer. But in my office, I have rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. And that is a quote by J.K. I'm so curious as it relates to what lessons you learned in terms of, the whole rock bottom dynamic from participants or even within your own life that we can kind of hold on to in terms of understanding levels for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, there's always hope. And I think that's what I've learned in my life, hit rock bottom several times. But, and at that point you can think, feels like there's no way out. It's hard to climb up out of that, but there is always hope. And one of the keys that came out of the research with these people really was they were hopeful. They had a lot of hope, that they could. And it wasn't like wishful thinking hope. I really want to have a great time at work, but work's actually crap, kind of thing. It was actually, no, I believe in this, and I actually achieve it daily. So yeah, so being hopeful, and when we're at this point, having hope. And yeah, I think that's when I was feeling miserable in this dream job I talked about. I did have hope. I kind of knew there was as you use the word proactive, some kind of proactive way forward, but I couldn't quite get the help I needed, or access the tools, but I knew they were there. And I think that's ultimately led me on the path to doing, research and finding those tools for both myself and other people. So have hope. Yeah, I think from that research I saw, there's always a way forward. And even, in life, we know we've been through some tough times. You've been through tough times. I think a lot of us have. And we do find a path out. And we often, we end up using that, don't we? What
Yes.
we learn, the struggle can be helpful for both ourselves and others, and sharing with others. And you do that yourself with your grief, training and so forth.
Absolutely. I love that you shared that. And it's interesting as Dr. Catherine is talking, I almost think she's in my home office because because not too far away from that quote that I have from J.K. Rowling is the name, or the word I should say, hope.
Mm.
Hope. And I love that you share the not only the importance and the impact of hope, but then also the importance and the value of what that means internally in terms of one's belief, and how that can really, in terms of that mindset, right? Being hopeful in terms of your mindset, how it can serve you and how it can also help you in terms of maybe shifting a situation, and understanding that you're not stuck. I love that. So this is the part I don't like. This is the part where I start wrapping things up. I say that because I'm really enjoying talking to Dr. Kathryn and hearing all of the wonderful work that you're doing and all the really the great messaging, I should say, that you're sharing within coaching. So for those individuals that are listening to us right now who are saying, you know what, I love this as it relates to hope. And I love this as it relates to really trying to have someone serve as a champion for me within the workplace as a coach. Where can our listeners find you?
Oh, thanks, Dr. Courtney. I'm just loving this conversation as well. I just could go on and on. But yeah, so they can find me. So my website is www.happinessatworkcoach.com. happinessatworkcoach.com. So it's quite simple. And if they go on there, they can, there's a free PDF they can download, which has 3 steps to enjoying any job. So I welcome your listeners, if they'd like to download that. And of course, they can always contact me and we can have a chat as well about what I offer and if it can be helpful.
She has such a wonderful website that is extremely informative and provides such great information and background as it relates to the really extraordinary work that Dr. Kathryn is doing. And you can also find her website on our website as well in terms of her episode page. And so before we go, I ask this question for every guest that ends up here on the podcast, because courting happiness is all about one's commitment to either happiness or their well-being, right? In terms of really creating a life they love. I want to know, especially as a scholar, a researcher, an author, an entrepreneur, the list goes on as it relates to Dr. Kathryn. I want to know, how do you go about committing to your happiness journey?
Oh gosh, well, I think it's perseverance. I think, as I said, I think we talked about having hope, and I think I'm an inherently hopeful person, and so I do, and I do believe life's extraordinary, and it's an extraordinary opportunity, and I want to have extraordinary moments, and I do, and I have my, it's up and down as well. So, but yeah, I maintain that sense of hope in extraordinary nature of life and of relationships, and a discovery about ourselves, about our circumstances, about the world and other people. So yeah, just I guess a curious mind about what might happen, what I might experience. Committing to that, I think.
I love it. I love that. I love your philosophy. I really treasure all the work that you're doing. And I'm wearing my Peace, Love, World gratitude shirt in really in honor of Dr. Kathryn, because it says feeling grateful, because I'm so grateful that you not only reached out to the podcast, that you're here and that you share so much of your great work with us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Dr. Courtney, it's been such a pleasure. It's been such a blessing. Thank you.
You can learn more about where to follow Dr. Kathryn Owler by visiting her episode page on the Courting Happiness podcast website at drcourtneyaulston.com/podcast/episode 59. And you can purchase her book in the Courting Happiness library. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drcourtneyaulston.com. That's podcast@drcourtneyaulston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.